Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Midweek Connection. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Pastor Tom. Let's talk about talking back to fear. We're always taught as, when we were children not to talk back. And while that's not a good thing to talk back as a child to an adult, we need to talk back to our fear. If we don't talk back to it, it will do all of the talking. Again, the things that I teach, I have either learned throughout my life and kind of relearned it and developed it into being able to teach it, or it's a continual process of learning. For me, either one of those two, and for this one, it's both. Have learned and am continuing to learn about how to deal with fear. So again, the title tonight is Talking Back to Fear. I'm going to ask you to name a fear. Just come up with a fear in 5 seconds. You have already, I'm sure. If this episode is one that you personally relate to, fear, then you've already come up with a fear. If you have to think like for a few minutes of what your fear is, it's probably not an issue for you like it is for the rest of us. So name a fear, something that you're frightened of, you're scared of the thought of it happening. May have been a fear that you've had all of your life, and it may be a fear that has just developed in the last year or two. Maybe it's something that's even happened in you over the last day or two. Name a fear. I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of the fears that I have had over my lifetime. I'm currently not fearing that like I have, but I want to tell you about this fear that I've had. And to sum it up in a phrase, it's the fear of not getting a paycheck. The fear of not getting a paycheck. Now, you know that I'm a minister, and so how that relates to me in my life and at my job as being a minister. And again, I'm not talking about currently, but I'm talking about in the past, even though I really wasn't aware of it and couldn't define it like I am now. I was scared that if I would truly be the minister that I needed to be, and if I truly wanted to do what God was leading me to do as a leader, that in doing things like that, that might get me fired. If I really was to do and lead the way that God wanted me to try new things or to encourage the church to kind of be on the cutting edge of trying to reach people and be better as a church. If I did that, then there would be enough people, I thought, that wouldn't like me, and I could get fired for that if I really was myself. So that was an underlying fear that I had for many years as a minister, and it quite honestly kept me from totally just being myself and doing things 100% the way that God was leading me, because I had this fear. And I'll sum it up as the fear of not getting a paycheck. Fear has healthy choices. So your fear has healthy choices. Your fear also has unhealthy choices. So under the healthy choice category, whenever we're fearful, we can do one of two things. We can run away fast, or we can proceed with caution. And God has put those two options as good, healthy choices within each and every one of us. Let me just give you a weird scenario. Let's say that you lived in a city that had a zoo, and you lived on the same side of town or the same general area as this zoo. And let's say that it was reported that a lion got loose from the zoo, and the authorities didn't know where that lion was, but people were reporting, that they've seen it in their yard or they've seen it here and there. And let's say that you go outside on the front porch of your house, and from a distance, you actually see the lion. The lion doesn't see you, but you see the lion. Now, God has put in us healthy choices when it comes to fear. And one of those choices is to run away fast. It's sort of like the stove that can get really hot and burn us. Fear is the thing that drives us to use that stove in a healthy way. And it's fear that causes us not to get hurt or damaged by that stove. So one of the healthy choices that fear actually gives us, and it's a good thing, is that there are things in life that we are scared of, and we should be scared of, and we need to just run away from it. And then there's also another option that we have with fear, and that is to proceed with caution. Proceed with caution, which means that in that lion scenario, you still have to live your life, even though that lion hasn't been caught yet. And you can't stay in your house for the rest of your life. So even though there's a lion somewhere on the loose, you take the knowledge that you have, and that fear will cause you to be careful when you're outside. It'll cause you to be extra cautious in a healthy way when you're around that hot stove, so that you can use it properly, or so that you can still live life even though there's a lion on the loose. So fear is not bad in and of itself. God has given us fear, and in some ways it is fear that has got you to this point in your life. And some of you, I can see, are actually listing some of your fears, and if you want to list those, you are certainly welcome to. But fear isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. It actually can cause good reactions in our life. However, as you know, fear also has unhealthy choices. And the unhealthy choices are this: that you end up never risking at all. You just always try to play it safe. Or the other extreme of that is that you're just totally paralyzed and you don't do anything at all. So back to the lion scenario, you still have to live life, even though the lion is loose and still in your neighborhood. You still have to live life. And if we listen to fear, fear actually becomes stronger than the lion. And fear would tell us, if we listen to it, we can't take any unnecessary risks. Yes, we still have to live life to some extent. So here's what I'll do. Again, back to this lion scenario story. Here's what I'll do. The only times that I go outside, like to the grocery store or to work, if I have to go outside, I'll only go out into my garage and right into the car. And the garage, has a garage door opener, so the lion's not in there because the door's shut. So you get in the car, you open up your garage door, you immediately go out, constantly checking to make sure the lion didn't get in your garage. You shut that garage door, and then you go onto work or onto school or the grocery store, wherever you have to go. But then before you come home, you have to get somebody that like in the family or somebody, to go and just kind of sit in your driveway to kind of look around and make sure that the lion isn't in the neighborhood. And then you come back home and you zoom into the driveway and you immediately open that garage door and you shut it as soon as you can. And before you get out of the door of your car, you call your friend to make sure that a lion hadn't come into that garage while you were parking the car. And so when the coast is clear, then you get out of your car and you run back into your home, and you don't ever leave unless you have to. And so that's living life with as little amount as risk as possible, but yet that's not really living life, because you've allowed the lion to control you. That's really not living life. There's so many more things that you could do if you weren't living with the fear constantly of that lion. I mean, you could go to so many more places. You could go out perhaps for a walk if you would still be cautious. There's so many things you could have a picnic outside on your patio or something. There's so many more things you could do, but yet because you're so scared of the lion, you limit yourself to sort of playing it totally safe, and that's really not living. Or the other extreme is just totally being paralyzed, to where you lock yourself in the house and you never go out. I mean, you order your groceries in, and you quit your job, and you just never, ever leave home for any reason at all, because you're so afraid of the lion. Now, it would be wonderful if we only responded to fear in healthy ways. But that isn't where most of us are at when it comes to fear. It would be wonderful if every time you and I were afraid, it's only one of two things. We either run away fast, or we use that fear to be able to live around that fear, and we just proceed with caution. But most of us, while we do take those options, most of us struggle with taking those options, and instead, most of us struggle more than we would like to admit with the other two unhealthy choices, which is never really taking any risks, just playing it safe, or total paralysis. So many times we have some idea, or we have some cause, or some mission, or some desire, or some project, or something that we want to give ourselves to, but fear stops us. I mean, so many times there's something that we would like to do, like to be, somewhere we would like to go, something that we feel we should do, God wants us to do, but the fear of the lion causes us to play it so safe that we won't do it. Or the fear of the lion causes us to lock up our doors and stay inside the rest of our life. So I want to talk about our brain. Yeah, I want to talk about the brain here a little bit, and that is that from my observation, the brain is constantly working. It's constantly calculating, and it's constantly attempting to resolve. From the time we get up in the morning until the time we go to bed, and really all throughout the night. In other words, 24/7. Even when we're sleeping, our brain is working. And especially in our waking hours, our brain is constantly calculating, constantly trying to organize, constantly trying to figure things out, constantly weighing the risk, constantly attempting to resolve any issue that we're going through. It's just always working. And there is no shut off button to the brain. You can't stop it from working. You can't say, as much as we'd like to, I just want to shut it off. I just want to stop. I just want to stop this. You can't. You can't stop the brain. However, we can redirect it. And this is what I'm calling tonight, talking back to fear, redirecting our brain. The second thing about the brain that I want to mention is that the brain really has no sensitivity. It has no timing, and it doesn't seem to understand frequency at all. The brain is like the child who says, "Are we there yet?" You know, and you're on a 8-hour trip, and you're half an hour into the trip, and so 45 minutes into the trip, "Are we there yet?" And an hour and 15 minutes into the trip, "Are we there yet?" The brain is like the "Are we there yet?" child. It just doesn't seem to be able to calculate, you know, I just asked, "Are you there yet?" 15 minutes ago. And it's an 8-hour trip. The brain doesn't seem to do that very well. And so the brain constantly is frustrated about not being able to resolve a problem, and so will have no sensitivity at all of what you're going through in life. The brain doesn't say, well, he or she is going through a hard time, or he or she has enough on their mind right now, or he or she is sick today, so I'm going to wait until a better time to bring it up. The brain doesn't do that. The brain has no sensitivity, no timing, and doesn't seem to understand at all about frequency. Here's another thing about the brain. The brain always acts like it has new information for us. Every single time, the brain acts like it's telling us a new thing. Like it has late breaking news. Like it's the reporter that the news channel, you're watching a game, or you're watching your favorite show on TV, and the TV interrupts because there's news that someone else decides that you have to listen to, that it's earth-shattering news. And so all of the local channels go to this news broadcast and tells you about it. This is what the brain is like. It always acts like it's late-breaking, earth-shattering news. And so even though you are fully aware that the lion is loose in your neighborhood, and you've already kind of worked through that, an hour later, your brain goes, lion, lion, lion. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And, we're saying, okay, brain, I'm already aware of this. You already told me this. But then 2 hours later, lion, lion. The brain always acts like whatever it has to share with you is earth-shattering, and like it's something that you've never heard before, and it wants you to then sort of reprocess everything you've already been through about this lion. You have to reprocess it all again. It wants you to feel all of that fear again, go through all of the anxiety, can't eat, all of that, can't sleep. It wants you to experience that every single time, because that's just how the brain works. So what we need to do is, since the brain is always talking to us and always calculating and has a tendency to repeat itself and a tendency to overblow things and a tendency to always act like it's earth-shattering news, it's always speaking. What we have to do is change the narrative, because it's not going to stop talking. So we have to change the story. And we have to do what I'm calling talk back to fear. I want you to look at this verse. This comes from David, King David, in Psalm 42:5. Now, so King David is the one that you remember fought Goliath. So he knows something about fear. And then once King David became king, in those days, when you were king, you were always, every single day, you were always a target for someone to want to come and kill you or your family and take your throne away from you so that they could be king. You were constantly a target. So David had this fear that he lived with every day of suddenly being attacked and being overtaken, and the king would be killed and they would die in very gruesome ways. So he has this fear. And so what David learned to do over the years was to talk back to his fear. And it's described in scripture as his soul, talking back to your soul. Now, the soul in those days, it meant it meant what we think of the soul in terms of like the spirit, somewhere inside of you, we think of the soul. But also in those days, the soul meant it was a total of the mind and the emotions and your spirit. So it wasn't just your soul like we think of as your spirit somewhere, the heart of you, as we would say, but it was also a combination of that plus your mind, your conscious thinking, and also your emotions. So David here, whenever he talks about soul here and in other passages, he's really talking to himself, and he's talking to his fears, and he's talking to whatever negative emotion is inside of him when he says soul. So he says, why, my soul, in Psalm 42:5, why, my soul, are you downcast? In other words, he's talking to his fear, and he's saying, why are you feeling so scared? Why are you letting this dominate your life? Why are you so downcast? Why so disturbed within me? And the answer that he found from that first day of fighting Goliath, whenever he faced a fear, the answer was that the God inside of him is bigger than Goliath. Even though Goliath was the biggest fear and biggest enemy that anyone could think of in that day, the God inside of him, the God that he serves, was bigger than that which he feared. And so he says this, so put your hope in God. This is the answer. Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him. He's saying his answer is, when he sees fear, to remember that there is a God who is bigger than that giant. There's a God who is bigger, and you need to put your hope in the God. Don't try to put your hope in yourself when it comes to you and that lion. Don't try to put your hope in yourself and being able to figure out the movement of that lion. Put your hope in the God who made the lion. And then he says, and one thing he does is he praises God. Whenever he's fearful, he praises God. Whenever you're fearful, I would encourage you to put on some music, put on something to praise God with, to get your mind off of your fear and to turn it into praise. I want to give you some very practical thoughts as a way of kind of summing up my thoughts here. When I talk about talking back to fear, what I am saying is that you say something like, I know. Whenever fear says, lion, 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 you say, I know. I have already heard about that. I know that the worst fear that I ever could face or think about is a possibility. I know that the lion is out there. Here's what I want you to do. I want you, and this is what I try to do, to admit the reality that the fear, that the thing that you are scared of could happen. Instead of trying to act like it can't happen, and instead of trying to somehow deny the obvious reality of life, just go ahead on the front end and admit that the lion is there. Admit that the fear that you're worried about is there. It is a reality. It could happen. When it comes to fear, it's not if you're going to fail. It is when you fail. When it comes to fear, it's not if bad things could possibly happen. It's that when bad things happen. Now, I'm not saying that your worst fear is going to come true. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, when it comes to my story, my biggest fear was not having a paycheck. So when I burn out in ministry, and when I say burn out, I'm not saying like I had a bad week or I was exhausted and I needed to take a 2-week vacation and I'd be fine. I mean, I describe it as life mono. I couldn't work. I was so exhausted. I had been burning the candle at every impossible for so long that I was burnt out. I was clinically burnt out. I was depressed. I was not able to be a minister because I was so spiritually, mentally, and physically burnt out that I needed, for the sake of my health and my life and for the church, I actually needed to resign my job in ministry without like any warning and no job lined up. I had a part-time school bus job that I did. And so I left in a matter of 2 weeks. I left my job that was paying me every week. And I still had a mortgage and I still had car payments. I still had all this stuff. I left that and had nothing. And I was too tired and physically beat up and emotionally exhausted to be able to look for another job. I had nothing. And so I didn't have a paycheck. And that lasted for 17 months. And God, I found out, even when the worst thing happened that I could imagine, that I was, not that I could imagine, but the worst thing that I was fearful of so often in my life, even when that happened, I found out that God was bigger than Goliath. And God, through a series of miracles, kept my wife and I alive without that constant church paycheck for 17 months until I was blessed to find God led me to the job I'm at now and the church I'm at now. For 17 months, I experienced one of my biggest fears, and it worked out. So what I'm saying when I say is I know is this. I know that there could be a time when I wouldn't have a paycheck again. I know that. And so when Satan tries to scare me about that, I say, I know the lion is there. I know that's a reality. And that kind of disarms, the fear doesn't really know how to react to that because it's telling you big news, but you say, I already know that news. And I already know that if I think back to some of the worst times in my life and how God helped me through that, I know that because God helped me those times, he will also help me if I face the lion. So what I'm encouraging you to do now is think back and even write it down on paper. Write down just a list of the times where God helped you when you confronted the lion and when your fears became reality. I want you to think back to those times and how God helped you. And so when the fear comes up, you say, I know that the lion is there, but I also know that God helps me and has helped me every time. And here are the examples. And so for me, if that fear ever comes back, I can say, well, I know that the worst can happen, but I got 17 months of proof that says that God is bigger than Goliath. So here's what I encourage you to do. Say, I know. Say it with even a sense of not fear. Just say it with boldness. Just say, yeah, I know. And then admit, I know this could be really bad. I could not have a paycheck, or I could lose someone, or this could be really bad. But I also know that God has taken me through bad before. And even if bad happens, I am a child of God. And somehow, even with bad, God will take the bad and work it somehow into something that I can use and somehow will have purpose in my life. I may not know until I get to heaven, but somehow it will have all been for a good reason, and somehow it will work out. Do you know the people that God inspired to write scripture, especially I'm thinking about the New Testament, when they talked about fear and not fearing anything, they literally were people that their life was threatened and at stake, kind of like King David. But the early Christians could be killed for their faith any single day. And they knew that even if the worst possible thing could happen to them, which is being killed, that they were still okay because they would live again in victory with God in eternity. So even death, even if the worst happened to them, they could say, hey, throw that at me. Throw the worst at me. I know it could be really bad, but throw the worst at me and I'm still going to make it because God is bigger than the worst. I want to close with this. You talk back to your fear, and actually go as far as writing something down on paper that you're doing. I really believe that we are tactile people. We are people that need to be able to touch and feel. And so write down some way that you are trying to resolve the lion issue. And that could be that you've put cameras on the outside of your house, or you've put spotlights on the outside of your house, or you've got a lion neighborhood watch system going on. So do something to try, something positive to try to counteract the problem. And it could be that it's so big of a problem that you have no other solutions other than you've prayed and you're praying about this. So write that down. I've given it to God, and every single day I give it to God. I ask, as I do in the Lord's Prayer, Lord, let your will be done today, and I'm going to trust you. Whatever happens is your will, and just rest in that fact. So write something down if you can, even if it's that I've given this to God in prayer today. And so when that fear comes back, then you get that paper out. Have that paper in your purse, have that paper in your pocket or something. Get that paper out and kind of feel that, or even put your hand on the Bible and say, I'm believing, I'm trusting, I've done all I can do. I'm giving this to God. Touch something that reminds you that you're trying, something that is, that reminding you of the answer, and then talk back to fear and say, I know you're not giving me something new. I know this could be really bad, but God has taken me through bad before, and I'm not going to waste one more moment of today on something that I can't solve or control. Some things you have to run away from, and some things you just have to proceed with caution. But you just know that God is bigger. And you think back to all the times that God has helped you, and you remember that. You've written that down, and you might have one thing that you're trying to do to resolve it, and put that down on paper. Put your hand on that, put your hand on the Bible, and just say, I know. I'm trusting in God. I know. And he's always got me through, and it's going to be okay. Hey, Kevin, thanks for being here. 2 Kevins, and thanks, Lori, for being here tonight, and some others. Tiffany, thanks for being here, and Deb and Dana. Always good to connect with you. And again, others were here as well tonight, and I know that many others will be watching the recording of this. So let's just do what we need to do and talk back to fear. Hope to see you next week, next Wednesday night at 8 o'clock for Midweek Connection. Remember to come to church if you're in our area. 10:30 is our service this week. Check me out on 24today.org. That's 24today.org. I have been posting nearly daily on different topics and different thoughts that I have. So just see you Sunday. See you next week. Thanks again.